Divya, hi, are you able to hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Sorry, my volume was low. Yeah.
Excellent.
Super. Great to be back.
Yes, excited.
So today we're going to talk about, maybe I'll just backtrack a bit and give a bit of context
Yes,
for
that
the
totally
listeners.
works. Because with today's a recap and reflection circle, let's talk about in brief what we chatted about the last two times, and then we can take it from.
Perfect. Okay, so let me start with the channel itself. So this is a new channel and it's called Nothing Changes Until You Do. The credit for the title goes to Mike Robbins, who actually wrote a book by this title. And in the book, he says someone told him exactly this thing. And he actually explained it, saying, somebody told him, Mike, you keep trying to control and manipulate the situations, relationships, and outcomes in your life, thinking that if they changed in the way you want them to, you'd then change and things would be better. It actually works the other way around. And this I found quite fascinating. It has resonated with me very deeply over the years. And I think I've come to realize this, although pretty slowly, and it has a profound impact on me. So that's about the channel. We're going to talk about different things, mostly around emotional intelligence. We've done 2 episodes so far involving one topic, which is why is self mastery a prerequisite for empathy and relationships. Today, let us do a recap and reflection on the same. So let me take a couple of minutes to do a quick recap. So first we ask the why question, which is more important than the what and how question. And that is, okay, we need self-mastery for empathy and relationships. But why do we need empathy and relationships in the first place? A short summary of that response is that in the good old days, it was not a must have, right? And when I say good old days, maybe even 10, 15, 20 years back. The carrot and stick approach worked, it was command and control. But as every industry and company move into a creative economy, which is what we are seeing happening at a furious pace, we really need to bring creativity, initiative, and passion. And in order to unleash those, we need to have empathy and build deeper relationships. Then we asked why self mastery is a prerequisite. Asking someone to focus on themselves when they're already managing maybe large teams, driving results, it sounds almost counterintuitive. But we must begin by understanding as leaders what is our role. We often feel our key job is essentially to hit the numbers, right? Uh, but what if I said that's not your primary role? We only manage people who get the numbers. I'm saying in general, not always, not every company, but most often that's the case. So if our main job is to inspire, is to motivate, is to guide, is to coach, is to role model behaviors, all of that stuff, then self awareness becomes key. And in the second episode, which was last week, we brought in the EQ framework. So we looked at the 4 elements, which was self awareness, self regulation, empathy, and relationship building. And in this framework, we kind of talked about how each of these elements build on each other, right? So we explored essentially 3 questions which show how these elements are interconnected. We cannot build empathy if we are not aware of ourselves. That was the first one. The second was we cannot build relationships if we are not able to manage ourselves. And the third one was we cannot regulate ourselves if we are not aware of ourselves. So that's where we kind of ended. We were running tight on time last week, and there were some interesting questions which we could not address. So it'll be good to explore those, and more than just Q&A, maybe share our perspectives on this topic to make it a richer conversation. Right? With that, I'll pause and open the floor.
Absolutely, Suman. Thanks for that recap. I think two things that for me were fascinating is when you said in the last conversation that, leadership, right? And a lot of leaders think, the common thought is that your job is about managing other people, right? So leadership is perceived both by leaders and by others as management or regulation of others. But you talked about how, effective leadership needs to be inward looking rather than outward looking. I think that was a big point, right? That we need to unpack a little bit. So that is one. And two is self-awareness, self-regulation, and empathy, right? The fact that empathy is emotional perspective taking, that's what it is, right? And
Yes, yes.
for us to be able to take the perspective off or put ourselves in other people's shoes, you can't do that without that understanding of the self, right? So and that
Absolutely.
beautifully fits into the first point, which is how do you then build more empathetic leadership? How is leadership more inward looking, right? So I think I would like to kind of mine your thoughts a little bit there also, Suman, on how you see this as a practice, right? Empathetic leadership or inward focused.
Absolutely, absolutely. Anything else? Anybody else who wants to kind of share something, or if you have any question?
I think for now, to start off with this one, I do want to, if we have time and time permits, talk about how theory of mind is essential, right, for an empathetic human being to function. And what that means is exactly this, right? That we use ourselves, Suman, and we use the way that we understand ourselves as a compass to understand how the world works, right? Essentially, that's what theory of the mind is. It is called as the cognitive perspective taking rather than emotional, but I think it's all interconnected, both cognitive and emotional. You can't do perspective taking without first understanding it yourself or having rules of thumb of how you work. But that's the other aspect that I think is interesting.
Absolutely. So you made some very interesting points. Um, we often look at things as we look at our role as managing other people. In fact, I have a problem with the word
I
managing
know
itself.
exactly.
Be- yeah, because some of these words which have become common because it all started with the industrial revolution, which was all kind of work with the hands, not with the head. It's almost if you look at the words that we use right in management, it is about compliance, it is about control, it is about regulation, it is about managing. All these words tend to imply that there is somebody superior sitting on top and basically managing everything below them, right? Whereas things are very different now. So the more it's no longer about compliance. Yes, I mean the good old days it was about standardization, and I think that is what has changed the most. Right today, it's not only about standardization. Right. In fact, standardization is very difficult. Um, so
And
yeah.
Suman,
So
this links back to what you were talking about. Today's world is being overtaken by with creative economy, right? And in a creative economy, it's even more important that management is not standardization, right? So I think yes.
absolutely, absolutely. In fact, I keep thinking that any program you look at. I mean, I did my management from IM. It's not called Institute of Leadership. It's called Institute of Management, right? So management is the management sciences, if you will, those which are easier to teach. But the management arts of all these softer stuff is much more difficult. But it is the hard stuff. Like they say, the soft stuff is the hard stuff. So yeah, I mean, and all this, the problem is all this is never taught, right? This theory of mind that you talked about, perspective taking, these are all relative new concepts, or even if they're not new, but relatively unknown concepts, right? Even if somebody's taken a course on management, they would know, marketing, they would know finance, they'll know, it was basically, it's all kind of compartmentalized. But very few people are actually taught leadership, isn't it? In fact, the question is whether leadership can be taught in the first place,
Exactly.
isn't it? Yeah, so for anything, I think we need to look inward. And I think that's the point we kind of harped on in the last two sessions. And I'm completely convinced. And the question that I pose with everybody is that if you look at those three economies that we talked about in the first one, right? So we have the starting with the industrial economy, then we have the knowledge economy, and then the creative economy. Now, and the question I pose is which economy do you think you're operating in mostly, right? And if that answer to the question is creative economy, then the whole thing changes, because the traits which are required is no longer about just about obedience and diligence, because then you need creativity, initiative, and passion, and all of this stuff is all emotional stuff. And in order to do that, we need to build empathy and relationships. So they're kind of all tied together, right? Yes, perspective taking is again a part of empathy. So empathy has the cognitive side and the emotional side, and we've seen this, isn't it? I mean, sometimes we feel for others, which again there is this neuroscience behind it, which is the mirror neurons. But in a workplace, I think the cognitive perspective taking is probably more used, where you kind of you you try and understand what the other person is thinking. Yeah. Um, does that kind of answer the question?
Yes, it does, Suman. I think that is that it definitely does, right? It is it's a bit to chew on. I did go back to some of the questions we got last time. Some of the questions that we people were chatting about is
Right.
one of the problems, and I think Jafar was bringing this up last time, is the fact that sometimes we see logical and empathetic as very different, right? And it also
Yeah.
stems from the fact that we see logical and emotional as very different, like rational and emotional as the enemies of each other, which it really isn't, right? In a lot of cases, an emotional response is the most, and I mean emotional in the fact that every response is emotional. First of all, whether we decide to approach or avoid a situation is based on how we appraise that situation emotionally, right? There is no decision devoid of emotion. But having said that, therefore, a lot of the times emotional options or emotional things are rational, right? They it makes sense. So I think that was one of the things that came up last time, is it problematic that we see emotion and being rational as completely two different things?
Yeah, that's a very good point. In fact, one of the one of the what should I say, the light bulb moments for me is when the research on decision sciences basically tells us that the rational mind is not so good at being rational. It's actually rational. What it does is rationalize what the emotional mind has already decided, right? And Divya, you're in a much better space to talk about this, because you're a master's in this area in decision sciences. So probably you can shed some light. But to me, that was a big eye opener. And in fact, when I discuss this with senior leaders in workshops, it's often a very interesting point, because, and the more senior we are, we tend to feel that very, very rational. You talked about no decision is devoid of emotion, but we would like to feel that, we are taking a decision devoid of emotion, because emotion, somehow the word itself has got a negative connotation, right? So we want to be very rational, but there's enough research to show that there is nothing like rational. In fact, what you feel is rational is actually an emotional decision,
Exactly.
right? So
Exactly.
yeah, isn't it? So maybe you can throw some more light on this decision making part.
Absolutely, I would love to, right? I think this is exactly the problem, is that emotion, the root of the word also comes from hysteria, right? And it's a little sad, because the way, and that kind of gives it the negative connotation that you talked about, right, Suman, where
Yes.
you start thinking of emotional as a very outward display of like a burst of emotion, right? And the fact that it is more associated with women being emotional is a whole other ball game, which I'm not going to get into now. But I think that's
Yeah.
one of
Yeah.
the places that it comes from. And it
Hmm.
is not like I said, it's been time and again proven, right? There is in fact a study that shows that there was this patient who had an accident. He had a rod going through the emotional centers of his brain, right? And what happened is that he was able to walk, mobility and speaking and all of these were fine, right? His cognitive functions were also okay. But what they found was that the most simplest of tasks, right? Suman, for example, where should I pick milk from, and where shall I get my cornflakes from, or what can I have for breakfast this morning, or where should I buy this from in a cereal, where should I buy my cereal from in a store? He wasn't able to do these things, right? And therefore emotions, like, they are the precursors to our actions, right? Any action that we take, the emotions gives rise to action tendencies, which kind of determine the actions that we take. So without emotions, there's no such thing as behavior, right? Which is why you cannot take
Right.
rationality as a concept and say that it is devoid of emotions, because emotions are built in to being rational, being irrational, all of it, right? So I think it's a
Absolutely.
small
Absolutely. So
tidbit
you
from
can't separate the two.
exactly. Yeah.
Super. Yeah. No, this research that you just talked about is also very fascinating. I think this Italian neurosurgeon Antonio Damasio, I think,
Yes, he
talks about it
does.
quite a bit,
Absolutely.
right? In the Descartes' error book. In fact, I also quote that in the workshops, because that's also a huge revelation, which is that emotions really, emotions really move us to action. The logic only moves you to options, but emotions move us to action. And as leaders, I think our main job is to move people to action. It is not about, and this, which is why uh, convincing people on any topic just by logic is so difficult, right? We feel the logic is airtight, but it's very difficult to convince the other person about that purely based on logic, because finally it's the emotions that move people.
Absolutely right, Suman. And think about it, right? If you have to, as a leader, understand how to motivate your employees, right? Understand how
Yeah.
to energize your team, right? Understand why their productivity levels are dropping, right? All of these things require you to be able to understand and put yourself in their emotional state, right? And when I say emotional state, again, I mean it in the sense that why are they, why is that passion not coming through, right? What could it be in the environment, or what could it be in the context that's leading to a dip in, for example, excitement to come into work the next day, right? And if you were cued into some of these things, and if you thought about, as a leader, how do I change the context, or how do I change A, B, or C variables in their environment, so that their emotions and therefore their actions and outcomes change. It's such a good way for you to be able to test and learn things as a leader, right? Of how to get the right outcomes and actions. Suman, what do you think?
Yeah, no, sorry, I think I lost you suddenly in the last few seconds,
Oh, sorry,
but
sir.
I think I got the gist of what you were
Yeah,
saying.
yeah.
Yeah, no, it just got cut off. Yeah, so what you're saying is very true. In fact, what I say is, let's keep it simple. We don't have to get into the aspects of whether it's cognitive perspective or emotional perspective. The fundamental change we need to bring is basically constantly look at things from the other person's perspective. That to me is the game changer, right? Whether it's a one-on-one conversation, whether it's a presentation which I'm making. Now, am I only thinking about what I'm going to say next and what I have on the slides up there, or I also am processing how the people are taking it? Am I reading the room? Am I looking at the body language? When it comes to a differing viewpoint, let's say I say something and you have a differing viewpoint, instead of immediately getting defensive and maybe creating a fight or flight response, just to take a pause, suspend judgment, and to see where the person is coming from. So essentially, get out of our head and get into their world. And to me, that is absolutely that's a phenomenal thing to do. And in every aspect of leadership that one looks at today, suddenly everybody is talking of empathy. 2 days back, I did a program on change management, and I was looking at some of the articles, and one of them, which is very interesting, because if you think about it, change management has been one of those hard ones, right? It's all about technique. And one of the articles said the key to change management is empathy, right? So it doesn't matter which area you're talking about, in anything which is connected with leadership, finally it goes back to are we looking at it from the other person's point of view? Yeah. I think we are almost down to half a minute, so we
Yes.
are good. So Anything else, Divya?
Yes,
Last
Suman,
few
this was
seconds.
great. I think this was really nice because it kind of looped back around to management and leadership. I also think that, now we've talked about the importance of building this muscle of kind of looking at other people's perspectives. We could talk about in one of the future sessions how to do it, right? What are the exercises we can take to build this muscle, if that makes
Sounds
sense?
good. Sounds good. Yeah, maybe we can do it in the next one.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you so much, Suman.
Thank you. Thank you, Divya.